Hello world, Lisa Friedrichsen, your friend and computer science professor with another short screencast from javascript.info, the modern JavaScript tutorial. We are working in part 2, where we connect our JavaScript to our web page, and specifically we're working in the form section, 4.3. We're going to learn about new form events. We're going to specifically work on the change and input event. And to do that, I thought he had a great little example here at the end, his task, the deposit calculator. As we modify the number in the initial deposit, we see our bars changing. So if we initially deposit $100 for 1 year at 5% interest rate, we're going to have $105 at the end of that year. And it changes based on the values that we change in any of these controls, our initial deposit, our interest per year, or our number of months. I thought it'd be fun to copy and paste that into Visual Studio Code and examine it a little bit further. And when I did that, I saw some things in his example that I wanted to improve upon or refactor. First of all, in his HTML, he has some dangling text, and we don't want that. We want every piece of content to be marked up with an H1 or an H2 or a P describing whatever that is. Second of all, he's got the positioning of the different elements on the form done with a table. And this is a big no-no. We want to style and position our elements, our content on our page with CSS, not with tables. Tables and table rows and table data cells to position things side by side are really a history lesson now that we've got CSS. It's not semantically correct. This information is not a table, so it shouldn't be put in table tags. And then the other thing that kind of bothered me was the inline styles for the bars. For the most part, we do not want inline styles, just like we do not want inline JavaScript, because it smushes together two languages in one spot, makes it hard to read, hard to maintain, and impossible to reuse. So I tried to improve this a little bit and came up with this improved web page. First of all, I've got all my content marked up in appropriate tags. I kept the calculator input box and selected drop-down list in a form. So I've named my form calculator, and then I've appropriately used a label for every input box, a label for the select and drop-down list with the different option values, and then a label for the last input box as well. So here's my result. This much is the form. Here are my 3 labels. Here are my 3 controls that I can modify. And notice that the name of the form is calculator, and then the 3 controls, this is an input box. I've changed the starting default value to 100. It's just easier to calculate with. And then the label for the months and the select drop-down list. And notice all the values for this select box. And also notice that we've used the name HTML attribute to identify the form, to identify the first input box, to identify the select drop-down list, and also to identify the last input box. I've used labels and input boxes with default values of 100, 5, and selected on 12, so that when the page loads, those are the values that are automatically calculated down here. Then for my bars, I used div instead of putting those in a table row and table data cells. The main thing to know is that this money is spanned money before and money after. I've used IDs on those spans, and then the bars are ID'd height before and height after. We're going to work with those IDs and those form control names in our JavaScript. Down in the JavaScript, then, we assign the variable name of form to document.forms calculator. Remember, that's the name value of the form. On line 91 are 3 event handlers. Form money, that's this control. When his onInput event occurs, we're going to assign that to the calculate function, which is later. The months, when the change occurs, we're assigning that to the calculate function. And the interest, when the onInput event occurs, we're running the calculate function. So we're triggering that calculate function on 3 different event handlers. Changes to all 3 of these controls are going to change the money and also the bars. Now here's an interesting thing, and this is the point of this lesson, the difference between onInput and onChange. And if we were to use these in an add event listener method, it would be the input event and the change event. On input triggers that function every time that value is changed. Let's change this back to 12. It's easier to calculate. Both the red and green bars are changing, as well as the initial deposit and the becomes value are changing. If I change this to the onChange event, then you can see as I'm changing my value in my input box, nothing is happening until that control loses its focus. So for input boxes, if you really want to modify that value every time the user changes it, whether they use the input box and type directly into it, or whether they use the little spinner control that some browsers give you, you want that to be on input. Because on change is not going to trigger until the control loses focus. But on change event is used for the select list, not on input, because we're not really typing into the select list. We're really changing the value by picking another number. Now let's go look at the calculate function itself. I've added a console log calculated here just because I wanted to see every time it was triggered in my console. But here's some interesting statements. We're going to grab the three values off the form. The initial value right here, we're using the plus sign to turn that number into a number because we know that everything that comes off the form off of an input box is by default a string. We're pointing to this input box using the form.money property. Money is the name of that input box in the HTML, and we're grabbing its value property. We're grabbing the interest off of this interest box, and we're multiplying it by 0.01 to make it into a percentage. We're letting years come off of this select box, and we're dividing by 12, so we don't have to include the plus sign in these two calculations because we've learned a long time ago automatic type conversion says that if we've got a value that's a string and we multiply it or we divide it, we're going to get a number. In this case, we're just grabbing that number and it's coming in as a string, so we have to plus it or do something to it to make sure that we're getting a number out of that. The resulting value becomes a mathematical expression where we're rounding the initial value times 1 plus the interest rate times the number of years to find out how much our money has grown. So the result ends up getting put into the money after span, whatever's ID'd money after, and that goes right there, the result. The money before value is right here, and it just comes right directly off the form.money.value property. The interesting thing to me are these two red and green bars. And to get them to change as our calculate function is triggered, we're changing the height property of the style property of both of those spans. And we're assigning them to height before and height after. And we're calculating height before as the money.value, that's 210, plus the string px, because the height CSS property requires a value and then a unit of measure. The height after is a little bit more math, and it's a ratio of the result divided by the initial value plus the result plus the pixel measurement. And that gives you that change in those bars every time one of these controls is either changed or selected. So I've got 3 different event handlers running the same function. Thank you.